This week, strong woman Harriet Walker, accredited practicing dietitian and sports dietitian, joins Dr. Mack and myself to discuss metabolic adaptations to weight loss, how that impacts the individual. We're chatting reverse dieting, recovery dieting, time-restricted eating, fasting, if it fits your macro, paleo, lots more. Harriet, we're stoked you answered your phone. Let's get this going.
Welcome to the Body Science Podcast, bringing you everything you need, want, and should know about health, fitness, nutrition, and training. As always, the information contained in this podcast is for the information purposes only and is not designed to diagnose or be prescriptive to treat, prevent, or manage any injury, disease, or other health-related condition. All information provided in the podcast is the opinion of the individual and other contributors and does not represent the policy, procedure, or opinion of any other corporate entity or third party. Warning, this Body Science Podcast occasionally contains strong language, which may be unsuitable for children, unusual humour, which may be unsuitable for some adults, and advanced science, which may be unsuitable for bro science majors. Stay tuned. The Body Science Podcast is about to start.
Burn the fat and feed the muscles with this high-protein, low-carb, low-fat, best-tasting daily protein powder. Hydroxyburnline 5 proteins are released in a sustained chronological order, therefore maintaining their different absorption rates, fast and slow, ensuring constant muscle fuel so you stay fit, happy and healthy. This synergistic blend also includes 17 vitamins and minerals, added carnitine, and a proprietary blend of digestive enzymes, Digizyme, and a Rafti prebiotic to aid digestive health.
It's podcast time. It's all about being fit, happy and healthy today. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Mack.
G'day team, what's up? Whatever that was.
That was terrible.
That was terrible, but keep going.
Speaking of terrible, how's your Instagram account any better?
My Instagram account is on fire.
Okay.
Still, I'd like to thank the 5 followers for mum, dad, and my 2 kids.
At the Dr. Mack, if you want to waste 5 minutes of your time.
No, it's looking really good.
It is? Okay, beautiful. What's really important today, we have an accredited sports dietitian on, Harriet Walker.
That's me.
If you want to catch Harriet, you're ready for this, get a pen, at Harriet Walker _athletic eating.
You got it right the first time. Well done.
And that is your website as well, .com.au?
harrietwalker.com.au.
Because you are all going to want to go there after this podcast.
Soon to be
straight athletic eating.
Athletic eating.
Oh, really?
Boom.
Okay. Well, now you're confused, everyone. We will put it at the bottom of the notes, bodyscience.com.au/podcast. Today, we're going to talk about metabolic adaptations to weight loss and why they impact the individual. Now, I've been around this for a little bit. We've had a little bit of a chat about this. There's some good stuff coming up.
I'm excited about this.
Perfect.
Yeah, so there's a fair bit of ground to cover. So I think we're going to just make our way through it.
What we're going to talk about now is what to expect post-comp. Well, let's go straight to fitness industry.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I can lead in a little bit. So we've in a couple of previous podcasts, we've talked about comp prep. We've talked about different strategies leading into peak week and how people manipulate their training and diet and that sort of thing. And so we thought it might be a progression on that, just to talk. There's a lot of stuff going on in the nutrition world. I'm all about staying in my lane, so I'm going to stay in my lane today. For those people that say Macca always says stay in your lane, so. We've got the nutrition person in the room to give us that perspective on things. So reverse dieting, recovery dieting, all that sort of stuff. So Lane Norton, in the social media world, Eric Helms, these guys put a lot of information out there. And I think it's probably worthwhile for us to have a chat around, some of the approaches to that, and even from a registered practicing dietitian's perspective, what your experience might be.
Yeah, 100%.
And value in it, yes, no, what do you think? Or just not even just for the athletic population, but for the average person.
Yeah, maintaining weight loss.
Yeah, I think, if you go on a diet, I actually think, I don't know, just for my 10 cents worth, I mean, if people go on some sort of regime, they should probably reverse out of most things, I would think. So, I don't know. Let's roll with it. Just see what you think.
I mean, I suppose where I'm coming from, like I've competed myself in figure. So I did that a few years ago, and I work with a lot of fitness figure athletes as well as a lot of athletes who are making weight. And there's a couple of different arms to the sort of the aftermath, and I think it's a topic that gets discussed more now, but there's still a lot of work to go in terms of getting the evidence-based practice to follow up with. A lot of the bodybuilding stuff has been happening for years, and we're probably just catching up with the evidence-based practice off the back of that. So the first one I'd be looking at is, okay, so what's psychologically going on with the person. You know, coming off a comp prep, you know, you might be doing anywhere between 12 and 24 weeks. Some people, you know, they might do a full year prep. So psychologically there's a lot going on there. We've got to make sure that they're being looked after from that perspective. And then, look, we've got to look at the implications of, you know, dieting, being in a chronic calorie deficit on the individual's metabolic rate, hormones associated with weight maintenance, weight regain and whatnot.
Yep.
And then...
So people's preoccupation with food
100%.
becomes a massive issue around just their attitudes, right, towards...
There's a really big culture, I think I would call it a culture, whereby people are, you know, hoarding food, waiting for when they get off stage.
Yeah.
And that nosedives them straight away into a potential blowout. I like to have the conversation with my clients early, before they've gotten on stage, about how you handle the aftermath, because if they're talking to other people and they're hoarding food, it does set you up for that sort of potential risk of disordered eating. You go from restriction, and we know, you know, dieting is kind of like a bow and arrow. The harder you diet, you're pulling back and back and back, the further you're going to fling forward.
Nice analogy, Greg.
I like that.
I like it a lot.
It was.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry.
you.
I was thinking about my
Train of
Monday to
thought
Sunday.
gone.
I'm thinking Rambo
Yeah.
in the forest with his bow and arrow.
Nice.
But, I mean, the first thing you want to be doing is having that conversation early.
Yep.
And we're thinking about basically what do we need to get back on track to establish behaviours. And I like to transition people from, you know, an aesthetic-based sport to maybe looking at, okay, what can we give you that's going to help you transition into more performance-based. So automatically they're thinking about, how do I go from eating for aesthetics to eating for performance? And that sits a little bit better with people, I reckon, because they're not thinking about their abs, they're not thinking about, you know, losing their quad cuts. They're thinking about, how do I fuel my body as an athlete to perform? And I find eating for performance is a lot more of a positive approach, you know, from a psychological eating pattern perspective, than eating for, you know, aesthetics. Because we all know those people on the front of the cover. I think it's well established now. They don't look like that all year round. And if they are, they're doing something that we don't know about. You know what I mean?
So do you have a philosophy around, some of the sort of classic reverse diet, or whether it's a recovery diet or whatever you want to call it. So there's some pretty popular stuff out there in social media, like some pretty conservative protocols around a reintroduction of, you know, all sort of macros and that sort of thing. And then there's a couple of people, Eric Helms and a couple other people out there who are a bit more aggressive in terms of their return to, say, a certain weight.
Absolutely.
You got a general philosophy around that?
Look, I think there's theory and then there's practice. So that there is starting to pop out with a bit of theory on, you know, increasing 10% calories per week and doing it step by step. In practice, it's different. People they like to think that they're doing a reverse diet and they end up diving face first into the closest McDonald's drive-through, and it might not be food that they ever wanted to eat prior to competing. So I think it's good to prepare people, and I try and give clients a plan for afterwards, because they're in the routine of meal prepping. So I would say, look, there is research on the more aggressive, and I think the faster you can get people back up to a normal eating habit, the better. But I mean, you also have to sort of look at the individual that you're looking at and go, okay, where are they at psychologically? Some people bounce back really nicely, and if they're an athlete and they did it for the right reasons, they competed because it was a challenge, and they're not really too hung up on their body comp, they tend to recover really well, and they're happy to establish an eating behaviour like they did before they started. Then you've got the people who might have used competing as a weight loss tool, and they're the people that a little bit of extra structure probably would be beneficial, walking them back up. And then we look at the research around hormonally. We know that we get a reduction in thyroid function. We know we get some leptin ghrelin playoffs. Our body's driving us to eat more, and we can only ignore that for so long. So we get that increased in ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. We get a suppression of leptin, which is our sort of satisfaction hormone. And a lot of the research is looking at, if done properly. I think Trexler did some really good work on the implications of dieting for athletes, and we're looking at how quickly do those hormones go back to normal after introduction of calories post-dieting. There's a lot of talk about metabolic damage, and I think people just eat too much. I'm not discrediting. There are, in some cases, we do get some thyroid dysfunction. We do get some slow, lowered, metabolic patterns.
Yeah.
I also think there's that psychological, that like I was talking about before, the further you pull back, the harder you go forward. I've been there. Like when I was 10% body fat when I was competing.
Yeah, so that was going to be my next question, actually. Like, what did you do? Yeah,
I got a little bit chubby.
Did you?
Yeah, that's how I got into strongman, actually.
I got a little bit chubby and I stayed a little bit chubby. What happened there? Anyway, sorry.
No. I don't want to say anything, but...
That's harsh. Wow.
Lucky there's a table between us.
I'll tell you what, you're absolutely spot on. Wow. Oh, it's going to be like that. I didn't think it was going to be like that, but okay.
So how big a problem is this?
It depends if you make it a problem, and it is an attitude thing. People who go into competing as a weight loss tool, they think they're going to stay that lean, are generally the ones who come out the worst. People who've got a good coach or dietitian. I would like to think a sports dietitian are a really great person to be working with, and your coach, like your actual training coach, to come out of it. It depends on the person. Like if they've got a plan.
How many coaches are consulting with you?
Look, I generally chase them up. It's the other way around. I'd be very happy to talk to any of. But the thing is, it's a bit of a ground thing. People think that they're doing their thing, and I'm going to tread on their feet. But I think there's room for everyone and there needs to be room for everyone if you're looking at the person who you're working with's well-being at the forefront, which is where it should always be.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about that in the previous podcast around the whole comp prep coach side of things, and trying to find someone who can, I guess, lead you in the right direction in terms of the overall, training, nutrition, comp prep side of things, because there's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts to it, and it's challenging, particularly in the physique industry now. Online coaches versus face to face, a lot of cookie cutter stuff going on with people just rolling out, $50 a week sort of thing, and I'll do a 14-week preparation for you, and it doesn't really tick all the boxes. And most of those, as a really general comment, are going to drive people's calories into the floor. Under 800 calories a week type a day. Type of. Yeah, I know that's not very many calories in a week.
So lean on that.
Yeah, you'll get really lean on that. Really it's actually Macca's special.
Wait, there's a special at Macca's?
There's a special at Macca's. It's one burger. It's 800 calories. Nice. You can only have one a week. Well, shout out to McDonald's.
There goes my Huggies.
That's right. So it's hard to, get some stuff done. But and the other thing is just ramp the cardio up. So if you do 2 hours of cardio and you drive your calories into the floor, you're going to lose weight. Like we've said before, you're going to lose a ton of muscle on your way there.
Yeah, 100%.
Which defeats the purpose of what we're trying to do.
That's the art of bodybuilding. It's all about how do we maintain that lean muscle mass and reduce the body fat. And we can do a lot of different things to lose weight, but is it quality weight? And that's where I think, the sports dietitian is the well-placed person from a scientific background to understand the physiological impacts of dieting and to handle it. Obviously, we know that bodybuilding isn't going to be the most healthy sport, probably for the last 8 weeks of it. It's very unsustainable practice. But if somebody wants to do it, they're better off in the hands of somebody who kind of has a pretty good handle on what's going on physiologically and psychologically.
Yep.
And I think having competed myself and like cutting weight for sport on a regular basis, I know the ins and outs of psychologically what can be the impacts and figuring out how do I minimise harm to the person. So it can be done really well and it can be quite a positive experience for people. But in the wrong hands, this is what I do, this is what you should do approach to dieting, I have a really big problem with. There's a lot of people who post this is what I eat every day. people are looking at it going, oh, okay, but it doesn't take into account, it might be a mum of 4 looking at this going, okay, so if I eat 1,200 calories and train for 2 hours a day, it's like, there is no reason that people need to know what I eat. I'm more concerned about what they're eating because there is so much individual variation on intake that needs to be taken into account. That it actually should be completely irrelevant what I eat. Like, I post pictures of my meals purely for, I'm addicted to Instagram. And
How many calories in that?
At least 1,000 for breakfast.
Nice. I like it. But it's like anything, like the sports dietitians probably haven't had a huge presence in the physique comp space.
Yeah,
I mean, certainly in sport.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you look at professional sports in Australia, professional like AFL, NRL, the sports dietitian or the dietitian is certainly going to be associated with those types of sports. Massive part of it. Whereas the physique side of it has much more been, industry based, a lot of PTs or comp prep coaches, and there is this perception that maybe the sports dietitian may or may not be the right place to go. Yeah. And I think, but it's like anything, you got to shop around, right? Like it doesn't matter whether it's an optometrist, a physio, they'll have an area of specialisation, and it's the same with nutrition.
100%.
And there are people who concentrate on, paediatric nutrition, older pops, sports, all that sort of thing. So, the information for the listener is all about. There are people out there. Yeah. And so
look at qualifications.
Yeah, look around.
Look at their credentials, look at their background, look at their experience.
Yeah.
And absolutely, like, I think, there are definitely some sort of what we would call physique coaches who do walk the walk and do a great job at keeping up to date with the science. So that's not to say that, that's the only way. But there's definitely a lot more evidence base to it, which is fantastic. It's informing practice. And a lot of the old school stuff, I think you'll find, like, even around water loading for bodybuilding competitions. I know I've done some emailing with helms on, okay, where did this come back from? Like, where did this even start and why are we still doing it and does it have a place? So we look at water manipulation for making weight versus water manipulation for bodybuilding. Two very different reasons for doing it. One works, one is completely useless.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
No, mate, you go.
No. I was just going to say, so, and you mentioned the qualifications, so that's my bugbear. I'm all about checking out people that you work with, make sure they've got bona fide qualifications. And, there's a reason that the vocational education industry had to come up with ways to avoid plagiarism and copying of certificates for Cert 3s and 4s. So now RTOs have to have a way in which they authenticate their qualifications, because a lot of people were just getting their friend's certificate, photocopy it, and make it look like they've got a Cert 3 and 4.
About RTOs,
yeah. And
what
so, absolutely, no. So so check people out.
So
make
how
sure
do we
qualified.
check out who we talk to? Is that from the Accredited Sports Dietitian perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the SDA, so Sports Dietitians Association of Australia. So that's the one that we would go through for sports dietitians. Just for your regular, like, there's lots of different specialisations in dietetics. So there would be like accredited practicing dietitian. So I'm both. So each year I have to do X amount of professional development hours to make sure that I'm up to date with the latest research, and I probably do well beyond that, like myself personally, but I think a lot of the people who are in the industry are very dedicated to staying up to date with best practice.
That's pretty good.
And so
that's a pretty good plug. Pretty good self-plug.
I liked it. With the fitness industry, how much of that time's being spent like talking competition dieting, and I assume that the money's coming from people towards NRL, AFL, Olympic sports.
Oh man,
am I incorrect in saying that? Like, in the SDA.
Oh, yeah.
How many people there would be over? I mean, you've competed, you get it.
Yeah.
How many people in the SDA would be? And you're probably not going to make a lot of friends with what the answer coming is, and I apologise for putting you there. But
look, I think
what we don't want is people contacting the wrong people.
But I think, and also there's I think as a community, there's always the we refer to each other. I think there's a good handful of people, especially up here in Brisbane, Gold Coast area. There's a lot of really high quality sports dietitians who are working in the area. And look, a lot of people are very happy to refer on. If I get somebody who wants to do an ultra marathon, like, I can give them the basics, but I know that my mate down the road who's a better sports dietitian in that area, I'm going to refer them on.
Yeah, nice.
You know, that's important to know. It just keeps our work, it keeps my work credible. And I think people enjoy the fact that I can say, oh, look, that's not my lane.
Yeah,
Stay in your lane, man. That's my thing.
Until I start running ultra marathons.
100%. I couldn't agree more.
You've always got next week. How many accredited sports dietitians are there in Australia?
Oh, man, I don't even know that number off the top of my head.
Are
But
we
there'd be
talking
a few
thousands,
hundred.
hundreds?
Oh, yeah, there'd be
Hundreds. So each
hundreds.
state's got a body. And when we meet on the reg, we have a couple of low carbohydrate beers. No, we have the full ones. You know, and so
Depends if it
there's
fits your macros, I suppose.
Well, that's the next
it's a great recovery
topic.
fluid, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's perfect. It's got some carbs.
Yeah.
You know, it's got a little bit of everything in there.
Rehydration,
calories in there.
plus.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
look, I think the one thing that comes down is the person that you're working with is holding your personal welfare at the forefront, and they're not afraid to have those like fierce conversations if it's coming to the point where the person might not be doing it the correct way. You got to make sure that people feel like they've been listened to as well. So I'm an expert in terms of nutrition knowledge, but I'm not an expert on the person who's sitting in front of me. They're the expert in them, and I help them apply the knowledge.
Okay.
Research. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
Nice. I like it. Does that lead into a conversation around the concept of metabolic flexibility? Do we cover that? Do we talk about that?
We haven't, but I
No.
think that's probably
We might just define what that means first before we step forward.
it's when you look at fuel mix, so in terms of like carbohydrates, fats, proteins being used as a source of energy to fuel performance, so we call that fuel mix as a shorthand. Metabolic flexibility is referring to the ability for an individual to be able to utilize efficiently either fats or carbohydrates. So when we're looking at, say, like a ketogenic diet, the goal being that that person becomes highly adapted to use fat as energy. So their body is upgrading the machinery that uses fat as energy in order to be able to do that more effectively. And on the flip side of that, we would be looking at somebody who's a carb adapted. So I think everybody would be that if they're eating just a regular
Sounds like
diet.
a good diet.
But what we're looking at in terms of metabolic flexibility, for a very long time it's been quite a sort of a dichotomy. You're either fat adapted or you're carb adapted. But what we are looking at now, and there's some really cool information about periodizing your carbohydrate intake and becoming adapted, so that you might do a block of training whereby you're looking to adapt that fat utilization, and so you might go low carb for train low carb for an 8-week block of training, understanding that you're probably not going to get the best quality training. You're not going to be necessarily getting PBs in that block, but you know that when you come out of it, I'm going to be better off at utilizing fats and then introducing back carbohydrates for when you want to perform. So it's basically splitting performance down the middle of adapting. So when are you trying to adapt during training and when are you trying to perform? And so you're periodizing your diet so that there's a time when competition is probably further away that you're adapting to training, because training is all one big quest for adaptation towards a better performance. And then you've got the time when you need to go and you need to do your best, and that's when we're looking at using carbohydrate as a substrate. So that's what I suppose it's a very long-winded way of sort of metabolic flexibility is probably the goal now, rather than being one or the other when it comes to sports performance.
Okay.
And it makes sense. I mean, we talk about cycling training with different periodization strategies around strength and speed and power and that sort of thing. I don't know, but if you say to someone, it's an all or nothing type of scenario, like you said, people get bored, right? So I know certainly my philosophy is around, let's mix it up. Let's do, whether it's high fat, whatever it might be for a block, then go into another block carb cycle. I don't know, whatever. Yeah. From an adaptation perspective, I think there's good merit in doing that, to look at identifying, adaptation, performance. And we'll get there with keto, but there's there are some performance-based limitations around, a high-fat diet, with a ketogenic diet, and some of the concerns around that whole. So one of the concerns is around energy availability for performance, for a high-fat type of diet, for diet, and the whole pyruvate dehydrogenase complex. It has to do with the availability of ATP, fundamentally.
Do you just want to explain what that means to us humans?
Bless you.
So pyruvate is sort of a key component of what's called the TCA cycle, Krebs cycle, energy production, ATP production. And part of that is the conversion by an enzyme called pyruvate dehydrogenase to acetyl-CoA. And one of the key elements associated with that is oxaloacetate. And so that's where we can take products like alpha-lipoic acid, which tends to, I don't know, Harriet, I'm staying in my lane here, but certainly there's some philosophies, some of the work I've read by Dom D'Agostino and those type of researchers around the utilisation of things like alpha-lipoic acid as a substance that can facilitate that pyruvate process that probably dampens the effect. But one of the concerns has been around that availability of energy, carbs.
100%.
So performance versus adaptation, versus I guess cycling things and moving it around, and there's a whole range of pros and cons with all of these types of diets.
It's not, like I said, it doesn't have to be dichotomous. It doesn't have to be black and white. And I like to think of things more of a spectrum. Yeah. Like I think look at, everyone wants to be, like, it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer when you're like, oh, it depends, but it really does depend. Yeah. Like, there are benefits to, we know from research, it shows us that you might get some positive body composition changes from a high-fat diet. And some people might just prefer a high-fat diet, and I'm cool with that. Like, if that's their personal preference, we'll work with it. Doesn't reduce the fact that, when it comes to, like, are you going to win or are you not in that split second, generally speaking, we're looking at carbohydrates as a substrate to use for that winning edge.
Yep.
But, we might, like, I've worked with a couple of athletes in terms of manipulating their carbohydrate intake so that we don't necessarily have to reduce total carbohydrate, but we might actually manipulate carbohydrates so that they are in a low carbohydrate state for a training session a couple of times a week, and then refuel them for when they need to perform. So if they might be doing a training block where we'll get them to do a long steady state ride in the morning fasted, and then the night before we had them doing some exhaustive flat out sprint. So we've totally squeezed all the glycogen out of their muscles. We've done, they've slept low, so they haven't replenished after training, which is what we'd normally get people to do. And then the next day they're feeling pretty crappy. Get them to go for a really long ride.
Wow, I am never going to be one of your athletes.
But that's a really great point, because this is very high end stuff. We're talking people who are winning medals. Who are doing this stuff. If you're not eating vegetables, like sleeping, have a well-structured training program, and, like, I don't know, eating regular meals, this stuff is, like, useless. I get to use this with 1% of my clients.
Yeah, okay.
And I was really excited when I got to do it, because I was like, I've been reading about this in textbooks for years. But nobody, you got to go through the rites of passage in terms of actually being able to eat properly and knowing what's what before you can start doing this technical stuff.
And how'd that athlete go?
Really well.
Yeah.
Gold at the Com Games.
Gold at the Com Games. I'm going to clap that in.
Boom.
Thank you.
Australian athlete.
Yep, Australian athlete.
Thank you.
Yeah, really fantastic stuff. But I worked very closely with her coach. And that was when he was programming. I'm not going to program her cycling. I'm a dietitian. I can't get a cyclist to go faster unless I'm just yelling at them. But we're working closely with them. They're programming. So we said, okay, we want this person to sleep low. So they programmed, some exhaustive sprints. And then we told them to sleep low.
So can we talk about the dietitian coach role here more than the athlete for a second?
So in terms of working with a coach, it's a really important relationship if you can swing it. Like, in the ideal world, you're touching base once a week and you're looking at their programming. When I'm working with an athlete who's overseas, is if I'm lucky, I get sent their training program for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I'm basing their diet changes around that. When we're doing something very specific like carbohydrate manipulation, I'm making sure that they're across the research, I'm across the research. We both know what outcomes we're looking for from this adaptation block, and they're programming the training to facilitate that. On Wednesday, we're doing XYZ, and on Thursday they're training low.
Okay.
So it's if you can swing it, it's fantastic. Like it's a really nice relationship. But again, it's just being able to own your own work and then understanding that there's going to be other people who know more than you.
And Macca, from an S&C coach perspective, how do you guys work with dietitians these days?
Yeah, it's the same thing. So it should be a really sort of collegial type of arrangement where you stay in your lane, like we keep saying, but in a performance-based environment, one of the things I always look for, if as a strength conditioning coach, it's impossible to be across everything, right? So you want to use or engage the dietitian to be a resource for research and all that sort of stuff, and what's new and what's different, and bring that stuff to the table, different ideas around how we might be able to do things differently. I think that's the key. And then an individualised approach. I mean, we all talk about, in team sport, everything's individual, rarely, but that does happen from time to time. Yep. And, different athletes will have different needs across, whether it's weight gain, weight loss, whatever it might be. Older athletes need to maintain things, whatever. And it, in a team sport environment, you get a really diverse mix of needs. So in the football environment, you'll have a group of 4 or 5 young guys all living in one house together. No one can cook. No one's interested in cooking. No one shops. No one wants to shop. So how do they maintain, a healthy diet? And how do they have a diverse macros input on a daily basis? Yep. And so that can be a challenge. And so we've got to come up with different strategies around how you can do that, as opposed to the younger athlete who might still live at home, who may not have a lot of control over what mum puts on the table. Yep. And there's also one of the things I found, early on in my strength conditioning career. So we used to do the cooking workshops. We do the shopping centre tours. We take them to the supermarket and show them what a ripe banana looks like. And, it's not a crazy idea. Assume nothing. Show people how to read a food label, why things are stacked at different levels on shelves in supermarkets and things like that. Good choices around different brands even of different foods and condiments or whatever it might be. And then we used to do, we do a lot of cooking workshops and give people some rudimentary skills around how to prepare some meals, because they may not. I could name some names that I won't, but there's some people who struggle to boil water, and have never had to. And now all of a sudden they're living in a house.
I told you that in private.
I know, right? I'm sorry, I breached that confidence straight away. I had to throw it in there. But there's a whole range of not just the nutrition, but the availability of it. And at a really elite level, often teams will provide meals, breakfast and lunch and that sort of thing. And you can only control what goes on under your roof in terms of the training facility. Once they leave and they get in their car and they drive home and they get petrol, they go to the service station and they buy, whatever it might be, 2 litres of Coke and a Mars bar. Well, what are you going to do, right? And so there's an education component to that as well. So the strength and conditioning coach's relationship with the nutrition professional is really, really important. And so you look to them quite a lot, not just for doing skin folds and getting the body comp measures. It's about being engaged in the process, be across what the training cycle is and what we're trying to achieve, and who needs what. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all that sort of thing. Yeah, and that doesn't matter whether it's whatever the sport is, into the physique science side of things or whatever it might be. Travel. It's important. The dietitian needs to be across and will often go ahead of the team and make sure that wherever we're staying, hotels wise, that we've got the right foods that we need to have when we get there. And, there's a lot of working parts within that. So it's important.
Nice. Well, let's pull this back a little bit to talking about a few specific types of diets that are hitting the ebooks, Instagram accounts, Facebook posts. There's some Facebook posts on diet types coming up.
Oh, man. I love a good Facebook rant.
Let's throw a few out there. Keto diet. What do we think?
Where do I start? I love talking about ketones.
I like bacon, so I like keto diet.
Well, hang on a minute. Let's dial it back here. So you've had some experience with keto, I believe. Is that right?
I'm a bit of a fan of keto.
What was
you ask me that every podcast.
I know, because I want you to talk about it. So what's your experience? Because you've never talked about it.
I want to stay in my lane.
Yeah, but no. But this is your experience. You're happy. You're not giving dietary advice here. You're talking about your experience.
I found keto a very easy way for a guy that's nearly 50 to eat.
Yeah. So what did you do? Literally.
I ran a 75 fat. I sell protein.
75%.
My protein was a little bit higher than probably a traditional keto diet. I was at about 20.
20% protein.
And 5 carbs.
Yeah.
And to be honest, once I got into keto, I didn't find that 5 that hard to... I didn't crave a lot of carbohydrate foods after about 3 weeks.
And so how did you...
Day 3, I wanted to kill myself. Not that I'm encouraging anyone to do that, but I felt terrible.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not supportive of that
keto flu
sort
was
of
one of
situation.
the worst things I've ever had.
Yeah. And so how long did it take you to...
I apologise to my staff right now for those days too.
How did you... so that's a process, and that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Harriet. You know, most people's... There's a process of adaptation that needs to take place.
Yep.
Because we're fundamentally shifting the fuel source. Well, that's the whole premise of what we're talking about here, is shifting a fuel source from glucose by overwhelmingly the preferred go-to of the body to, oxidize or fat fundamentally. And so that process can take a period of time and will take a period of time.
And I think it's important, I suppose, to get a couple of definitions out there before you'd go any further. Like there's a couple of different things. Like, what are ketones?
Yeah.
So we've got beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetone. So they're the two major ones
lane right now.
that we're working with. And so basically they're a exogenous fuel, endogenous fuel. So the body makes them itself, and they're produced by fat mobilization. So when we're burning more fat, byproduct of which are ketones, we've got the 2 different types, and then we can look at whether there's different types of ketosis. So we're looking at ketosis from dietary, so nutritional ketosis. Did I get into ketosis by having a high-fat diet? Did I get into ketosis via fasting? Or then there's the third arm, which is exogenous ketones. So generally speaking, we're consuming a normal diet, but we are also consuming ketones from a little sachet, which will technically put our body in ketosis. And I think also it's important to look at, what would be classified as ketosis. So I think the definition is somewhere in the vicinity of 0.5 millimolar blood level of ketones. And that's a really important point when you start looking at research around exogenous ketones that we'll get out there to start off with. But I think we can probably keep going on that conversation. Yeah.
I just used to pee on a little stick.
You peed on a stick.
Yeah. Looked for a little bit of colour change and went... Nice job.
Emma, how long did it take you to get into ketosis?
For me, it was a couple of weeks, actually.
But you purely it was a diet-based
so you used
entry.
a high-fat diet.
You didn't use any esters.
No, I didn't.
Salts.
I went straight food path.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So, and I also...
Did you intermittently...
I did. I started getting into... Because my cravings for crap stopped.
Yep.
And that drive to, gee, what's in the cupboard? What have the kids got tomorrow that I can rip off before they get their lunchbox done? Yeah, it was very much taken away from me at about week 3, I'd say.
Yep.
And I pretty much went into, I wasn't really eating till about 2 o'clock in the hour, apart from, I love my coffee.
Yep.
I was having my coffee MCT.
Yep.
Maybe a little bit of cream on those days where I felt like...
So you're having that in the morning?
When fasting.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, during that
yeah, so technically that breaks your fast.
Well, it would, because there's some serious calories in that, which a lot of people don't realise they're drinking.
Delicious calories.
But it was very yummy.
If you put cream and MCT oil in your coffee, definitely. You'll pump up the caloric intake.
It's interesting. So normally, like if done either fasting or via dietary manipulation, you should get into ketosis after 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Just as a, as a thing. But also, if you're looking at it from a lifestyle change, it will take you a few weeks.
It did take, I'm 49, so, and obviously...
Looking fantastic.
No, don't even.
I'm hoping to get an invitation back.
Wow. So just on, so you didn't take any ketone. So there's ketone esters and there's ketone salts.
I did not. Look, I've done a fair bit of work on that, and I'm not actually going to go there right now, personally, because
taking them.
I've got a fair bit of knowledge on the actual ingredient sources that are coming out at the moment. So.
Yeah. So, the only comment I was going to make on those was that fundamentally, and this is Dom D'Agostino's work again, who's a prolific... Well, he's probably the guy.
Is that the NASA guy?
Yeah. So, in terms of ketones being almost another macro. So ketone esters, which I've tried, taste really bad, really, really bad. And the ketone salts, there's a few different types. There's there's the sodium, there's the calcium, magnesium, and potassium salts that are all... your gut tolerance is a big deal, I find, with trying to take these things, and how they affect the exit strategy of what you put in. But anyway, so one of the things Dom was saying, and not to sort of I paraphrase, but you're looking at about 6 calories per gram for an ester versus about 4 for a salt, for a ketone salt. So depending on how many of these you're having and what you're doing with them, you need to calculate that into your overall caloric intake potentially. So they're not
calorie free.
They're not calorie free. Is probably the thing.
And another point there, before we sort of go on, is how much of the exogenous ketones do you need to have to get into ketosis? And that's a really important one. So a lot of the research...
You mean what's on the label isn't right?
Well, there's a question as to whether or not it's just, do you just have a lot of ketones in your urine because you've just put them in and they're just coming straight back out versus are you genuinely in ketosis?
Exactly.
But when you look at the research, so D'Agostino and I think Brandon Stubbs in the UK, she's got the human, HVMAN, that they're bringing out. Their research is done using ketone esters, and they have the ability to raise blood ketones above that 0.5 within a couple of quite quickly.
Yeah, okay.
Can
I ask you a question there?
Yeah.
Why is that helping me lose weight?
There's a couple of different mechanisms we're looking at in terms of weight loss. I think with ketos, obviously you're potentially reducing food sources, so you might be reducing total calorie intake. Yep. You are utilising fat stores as energy because the body is basically, if you look at the body's makeup, our number one task is not to die. So,
I'm a fan of that one.
That's everything.
Maybe I can diet more.
It gives you a really good baseline of understanding. There's a lot of different mechanisms going on inside of our body that are geared towards making us not die. Yep. So our blood runs on glucose as a primary fuel source. However, if in a starvation state, which could have happened a few hundred years ago, but probably is not going to happen today, I would like to be able to search out food for longer once my glycogen stores had been depleted from being in a starved state. So if I'm fasting, basically, if I'm fasting and I need to go find food, I need to stay switched on long enough for my body to get me to the fuel source, to stay lucid enough to to get to that food as soon as possible so I don't die. Yep. So basically ketones are the byproduct of fat utilisation. So that when you're burning fat as energy, we're chipping into the stores rather than eating food. We're using what our body's got. And in doing that, ketones, our body can't use fat, our brain can't use fat. There's a barrier there, blood-brain barrier. So the difference is basically that ketones are water-soluble and they can actually go through the blood-brain barrier. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that although our brain might not have any glucose to access, worst-case scenario, starvation mode. We can use ketones for survival, and some people, and ketones can also be used by pretty much every tissue in the body. So heart can use ketones, like heart muscle. So we can use it. The argument is whether or not it's the optimal fuel or not. People will say that it is. It gives them clear thinking. It gives them it's like high octane fuel for the brain. Is some of the things that you hear.
I definitely got that. I felt good. I did.
Yeah. So
I'm still
with
struggling
the brain side of it.
And there's a bit of a high associated with fasting. That's another thing. You go into this this sort of euphoric state, and people actually get a little bit addicted to that.
Yeah, and I think there's one of the other mechanisms is around that. I mentioned that oxaloacetate before as a precursor for glutamate, which is a precursor fundamentally for GABA, which is a neurotransmitter. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on in terms of the role of the ketones and the improved brain function fundamentally.
Yeah, anyway, so from a weight loss, long and short, that was a really, what I was saying.
It was a really long answer.
Answer about basically using fat as energy over carbohydrates. And so you're chipping into your body's fat stores. And there's also potentially a satiating effect. So when I say satiating, I mean increased ketone levels may decrease appetite. So that's another aspect that it's sort of anecdotal at this stage, but there is some research. I think Stubbs are doing some research about the actual perceived satisfaction having eaten a higher fat meal. Okay. And so you're going to be less driven to eat as well.
Nice.
But we do need to look at, whether ketone esters are commercially available, which they're not. We get ketone salts. To get my blood ketone levels high enough to be in ketosis, I need to be consuming 2 or 3 packets. Then I'm also consuming a lot of sodium, a lot of salts associated with ketone salts. So, you can do it, but there's a lot of GI distress that is, like a tummy upset, basically, associated with a high sodium load. So you do find people, in order to get into the ketosis via the sachets, getting a lot of tummy upset because they're just consuming a lot of basically salt on very quickly, and that's going to cause sucking down some ocean water.
And I think some of us as well.
Go for a bit more salt on the keto diet.
Kidneys potentially. I'm probably not really across that one. Are you?
No, I know kidney stones are a pretty common side effect.
I don't want any of those things.
No. So on the salts, I know a lot of the companies will mix an MCT powder in with whether it's a sodium or whether it's a calcium, whatever it might be. That'll delay some of the gastric absorption and help with some of the gut tolerance. And then with respect to the kidneys, I know kidney stones are a big deal with the keto diet, and so I've read some stuff around the use of potassium citrate and staying really hydrated, and maybe even supplementing with some magnesium to alleviate some of those effects.
Okay, nice. Anyone here been paleo before?
Look, I've dabbled. I'm a scientist. Mm-hmm. I like to give things a go. So I think I probably about 6 months was post bodybuilding, so I was looking for my next fix. Yep. And paleo was just coming through, nerding out on a few of the paleo podcasts. So I gave it a go probably for about 6 months. I was having just an experiment with the old paleo. I think the thing that I found when it came to my training, I couldn't necessarily, I couldn't push myself as hard in my training.
You lift.
Body composition, I lift, and I like to keep fit. I'd like to be able to just do a 5K run if I need to at any one stage. It's not...
You're a traditionally strong woman though, aren't you?
Strong woman, yeah. And I was a rower as well. I used to do surf boat rowing.
Okay.
So when it came to sprinting, not great. Didn't feel as good when I was doing heavy training loads, basically.
So what type of human would you suggest a paleo diet to?
Look, there are benefits to the paleo approach. I think one of the biggest ones is that it's emphasising whole foods. Mm-hmm. It's really getting people to inspect what they're putting in their mouth. I think there are ways of making it available to everyone. I don't think, cutting out whole food groups, in my mind, is it's not necessary. I think the the work around grains, like I get that, we're looking at phytates impairing, mineral absorption. We're looking at, causing gut issues. A lot of people turn to the paleo diet when they've got stomach issues. And look, it's not my area of expertise with the gut issues. I know there's plenty of people who work in the area of FODMAPs, which is a really interesting thing. IBS is a very complicated area of work because we're looking at people who are experiencing like quite distressing bowel issues basically. Paleo is one of those ones that pops up when people they go to when they're experiencing like autoimmune diseases, gut issues, and I'm not necessarily a proponent of all out cutting out whole food groups. I did it, I cut out grains. What we're missing out on is, there's some B vitamins associated with whole grains. It's hard to get your fibre intake, which does have an implication on bowel movements as well. And then there's the dairy aspect as well. So I think, when people can tolerate dairy, I don't see why, I understand there's, research around how dairy is bad for you. There's a couple of big studies that underpin the paleo approach that, look, when you dig a little bit deeper, aren't necessarily the most rigorous. Like, I think we're better with research now than we ever have been. Mm-hmm. And if we were to go and do those research studies again, we may very well find different results. So when I'm looking at an athlete, the first thing that I'm looking at for them is one of the big ones is going to be calcium intake, because they're undertaking a lot of high intensity and in some cases high impact sports. And it's all well and good, for a 20-something-year-old to be cutting out dairy. But I see the client when they're 50-something and they're osteopenic or early stage osteoporosis. And I'm not saying calcium is the only mineral in the picture of bone health, because definitely, you've got...
Big topic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big topic. It's a big topic. And so, look, to cover it, it could take, we could do like 3 podcasts on it. But I think, the benefits are that it does really make you stop and think about the quality of your diet. And I think they do a really good job at emphasising unprocessed foods, whole foods, gets people back in the kitchen, it gets people preparing their meals and actually, giving a few more poops about
technical term
their bowels and their diet.
Someone had thrown in there. Come on. Well, I guess that leads into the next big one. If it fits your macros, the whole flexible dieting charge.
Bruh.
So I've gone paleo now. I'm eating everything. So
well, they're 2 different things, aren't they? If it fits your macros and flexible dieting are they're not the same thing.
Yep.
Well, look, they're rooted in the same sort of theory.
Mm-hmm.
However, the ethos behind them, I think, is different.
One's a little cleaner than the other.
Yeah.
So what's your interpretation, Harriet?
Look, I think the if it fits your macros is probably
that's my Saturday and Sunday diet. Just so you know,
I can make everything fit my macros. Basically, what we're looking at is carbs, fats, proteins as being our macronutrients.
Yep.
Carbs having 4 calories per gram, protein 4 calories per gram, fats 9 calories per gram. I need, say, 2,000 calories.
Alcohol as a caloric food group, Greg?
Normally, if you drink it, I don't. No.
Right. Sorry.
I know that's incorrect, though. I'll just put that out there.
Sorry, I was interrupting.
No, that's okay. Alcohol's got 7 calories per gram. I wouldn't say it's a macro. If it is a macro in your life, then we need to talk. But basically, you've got a calorie budget.
Why not?
You've got a daily calorie budget and you break down, okay, how many grams of protein, carbs, fats do I need?
Can I stop you there? And I don't like stopping people when they're on a roll because it takes... How am I calculating that?
Well, there's a few different equations you can use. Gold standard would be you would get them on a metabolic chamber, and we would be calculating their respiratory ratio. I don't have one of those in my pocket. So look, there's some equations that you can use. There's a lot of sort of useful online calculators.
I see a lot of calculators. I often wonder who calculated those.
They're based on population data. Yeah. So there's a Harris-Benedict one, which would be an athletic population. Then you've just got, the name escapes me. There's a standard one that would use for general population. Yep. One of the ways I would actually get people to calculate their daily intake, their usual intake, is actually track, like keep a food diary, like gives them training on how to keep a food diary, and then get them to keep it like 3-day minimum. But if they can keep it for a week without sort of getting mad at me, I do get people to look at, because then I actually can see Are you overeating habitually? Are you undereating habitually? And it gives me a probably more accurate picture. So once I know what their calorie budget is, we look at, okay, am I trying to gain muscle? Am I trying to cut weight? We create a calorie deficit, say, and I'm telling them, I'm prescribing, okay, you need to hit, it doesn't matter how you get the calories, but you need to hit 100 grams of protein, 250 grams of carbs, and 60 grams of protein. I don't care how you get it, just get it, and you're going to lose weight because you're in a calorie deficit, which in and of itself is not unreasonable. The only issue I have with that approach is that people flaunt it, and they will start saying, well, I can fit a Mars bar, some Pop-Tarts, a pizza, and, no...
Signs up. I'm in.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and a carb's not a carb, right? From a glycemic index perspective, you've got huge variation around insulin responses to different carbohydrate sources and things like that.
The approach, top level, doesn't really take into account that the food quality, basically. Like I could quite...
Where flexible dieting comes into play, it does.
Flexible dieting, it's not this. Look, there's not really a textbook definition of it, but I think
Is there an ebook definition?
There's probably a few ebooks.
Sorry, it's a joke.
I think the ethos behind it does give more emphasis on food quality, making sure that, okay, this is your calorie budget, these are your macros you need to hit, but you also need to be having vegetables with every meal. You need to divvy out your protein across the day. You need to be prioritising good quality carbohydrates. So, it's very it's little things like that. But I think as a tool, it is actually something that I've used with people quite successfully and myself. So I've stuck to meal plans before. When I was bodybuilding, I was on a very rigid piece of paper diet. It was the same foods for 12 months.
Wow, that would have been fun to hang around.
Oh man, I was the life of the party. Just doing my masters in a calorie deficit. It was so good.
Oh, wow.
But I actually use a flexible dieting approach now for cutting weight into competitions because it means that I'm not restricting any one food group. Okay. I know that I need to
That's a big thing for dietitians, isn't it?
Yeah, restricting food, because you don't know that, today I might be restricting a food group, but I don't know what the long-term implications of potential nutrient deficiencies may occur because I'm cutting out a whole food group.
Yeah.
It's kind of anyone's guess how that's actually going to play out. And disease progression doesn't start when you're 20. You get the diagnosis when you're 50, 60, which is a bit grim. But it's when did it start? And normally it starts a lot earlier than we get a diagnosis for something that might have been occurred from a deficiency or poor eating habits. But basically, so the if it fits your macros, flexible dieting approach is basically, everything's on the table. You don't have to be as restrictive, as long as you can do it in a responsible fashion that, emphasises whole foods, fruit, vegetable intake, lean meats, whole grains, the usual stick. It can actually be a way of manipulating calorie intake whilst having a little bit of what you fancy on a regular basis, which for me generally has more positive outcomes for the person because they're not saying this is toxic, this is bad. It removes a few of those food labels that I find can be quite negative.
It's good. A bit of compliance, all that sort of thing.
I'm going to throw one more in. Is that okay?
Yep.
Time-restricted eating and fasting. You're a fan of the fasting, aren't you, Macca?
Yes. I consider myself a intermittent keto modified fasting diurnal nutrition carnivore.
Where can I buy that ebook?
I know it's in press. It's on its way. Not a problem. I think from an insulin, I think there's a couple of keys around. If you think from a weight loss perspective, got to control insulin. I think it's rudimentary to the whole process, and caloric restriction is probably the other piece of the puzzle. You can't get away from that, I don't think.
That's in every diet, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's the principle.
Let's be honest.
Fundamentally, you can't really get away from it. It doesn't matter. Any of the ones we've already talked about, somewhere, somehow, you've got to be in a calorically restricted eating pattern, so to speak. So, I read a lot around diurnal pattern of eating, and
you love that word, don't you?
Diurnal. I say it all the time, but I mean it matters. I think in terms of some shifts in microbiome throughout the day. digestibility of different foods. You know, there's a whole range, and there's some pretty cool stuff that's happening in that space. And the intermittent fasting, as opposed to my read on intermittent fasting versus time-restricted feeding, and this is just my read on it, is that there's no change in my caloric intake with the time-restricted feeding. Mm-hmm. So whatever the caloric intake, it's in that block of time. And I know a lot of the original work in the time-restricted patterning was as about a 16-hour fast and about an 8-hour food window of eating window. And I quote Sachin Panda all the time and Walter Longo, that window is perhaps not as narrow as we originally thought. So even a 12 and 12 type of pattern, I think, based on what I've seen, is a pretty reasonable approach to that. And so, yeah, I think I'm genuinely a fan. And I like to cycle everything. So whether it's training, sups, different protein sources, whatever it might be, you know, mix it up. So it'd be the same with, like, I think I just grew up modified keto, paleo, carnivore my whole life. Grew up on a farm, ate a lot of meat, didn't eat a lot of veggies. You know, that's just what we did, right?
Like meat and 2 veggies at your house?
No.
Meat and 2 meats?
3 veg.
A meat and 2 meats.
Oh, 3 veg, sorry, my apologies.
Well, no.
Vegetable serves.
So out.
Yeah. So, yeah, so anyway, I'm a fan of that sort of thing in terms of, you know, and I think about, you know, the central oscillator, and we've got these peripheral regulators of everything works on the time, on the clock, so to speak, from our suprachiasmatic nucleus, which I roll out all the time. But we're not going to roll that out. But I mean, everything's on everything is on that central central regulator in terms of how our body works across all our organs and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think there's merit in that, and certainly. My other thing that while I'm on a little rant, is around fasted cardio. So
I'll get ahead there.
Hear about
my rant is that most people aren't even fasted.
How much cardio have you done? Like, let's start there.
Well, I walked up the stairs to get here, and I walked in from my car. Okay. So there's the cardio component of my day for the week. But so if you think about how we deplete the liver of glycogen, you're looking at 10, 12, 14 hours, ballpark.
Or exhaustive training.
But if you're just relying on your sleep overnight and getting up at 6 a.m. and you say you're doing your fasted cardio,
you're not depleted.
You better have gone to bed pretty early and eaten pretty early.
And done some sprints before
and
bed.
done a ton of sprints before you went to bed. Yeah. So that's my bugbear.
Yeah. Man. You know, it started on...
I think you guys are wrong. I've been on Instagram.
You're doing morning cardio, and you know what?
You guys are awesome.
You know, that's great. If you can get up and get going, fantastic.
We celebrate that. I agree.
Yeah, celebrate that every day. But that's not fasted cardio. Okay. I'm really sorry. Yeah. And so, anyway, that's my little rant. I don't know what Harriet's perspective is on it.
Long and short, like, we eat for a lot of hours in the day, probably more than we used to. And you know, sleeping in and of itself is a fast. Like, I think there's, you know, fasting and 5-2 and those different ways of manipulating and shuffling calories around. It's a tool in the toolbox. I think it suits some people, and if that's what works for them and they're prioritising good foods, it's going to be of benefit. I think if you can have dinner at 7 p.m. and then you're not eating until 7 a.m. or even 8 a.m., you've got there's an amount of fasting in and of that. So you don't necessarily have to be doing hardcore fasting, and I think the actual hardcore fasting for the wrong people doesn't have positive impact. And I think, there's a population that I'm thinking of where I wouldn't recommend fasting, and that's probably a whole other podcast, but I think, you know, giving your digestive system a break, 100%. Yep. Like, I think
it's a big thing these days.
We have access to food a lot, and there's something to be said for just a little. Give
it a rest.
People forget what it is like to feel hungry. They actually forget their body's cues, and I often get people to try and tune in a little bit better to their body cues, because it's actually probably the easiest way to regulate your diet is eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. But I can't sell a book on that.
No,
unfortunately.
There's a population who'll buy that.
How to listen to your body cues? Madness, absolute madness.
that's classic.
Crazy. But
Well, I'm going to wrap that up.
yeah, nice.
I think that's a good one. Harriet, thank you so much for coming. We're actually going to get you down to do another one. We might go a little bit of a live example.
So those
next.
compliments worked?
Yeah, you did well.
Wow.
How'd you go, Mac? You reckon she's all right?
On fire. Really well.
She stayed in her lane?
She was well within her lane.
Yeah.
Not a big swimmer,
I hope I stayed in mine. I think you stayed in yours. She's not a big swimmer. Me either, so we're all good. But no, thank you. Good.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
This podcast was brought to you by one of our favourite products, Hydroxyburn Lean 5, available at ASN Nationally, Sporties, DY Discount Vitamins, Fat Burners Only, Evelyn Faye and Rock Hard Supplements.